which are all up there suspended above your heads and will be here until the 17th of June. Underneath the Peace Doves, we have tried to put together a really interesting program which both engages with themes of inner peace, and we've got Imtiaz Darka, the poet, coming next week for an evening of poetry for peace, and we're running some mindfulness sessions on Mondays at midday. And working with the chaplaincy at the hospital as well on another event. But we're also looking at how peace can be brought about through understanding, and particularly through engaging with difference. And so we've got a number of events planned around those themes. Today has been wonderful. We're in the middle of Christian Aid Week, as Christian Aid are celebrating their 80th anniversary this year. And it's great that Alistair, who's here somewhere, there he is at the back, from Christian Aid, has brought along some materials about Christian Aid, which I hope you get the chance to pick up and have a look at the end. And we've just come out of a wonderful evensong celebrating that 80th anniversary. And we're delighted that this afternoon we had a really wonderful panel working with us on themes of polarisation, and particularly the church's role in polarised times. But this evening we wanted to do something. This is a special assemble. Some of you will have been to assembles before. This is a bonus one. We've got another one coming up in a few weeks' time during Refugee Week, which I'll say more about perhaps at the end. But this one is particularly as we think about racial justice and the title "No Justice, No Peace." So on the 25th of May 2020, George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, sparking global protests against systemic racism and police brutality. Our TV screens, I'm sure you will remember, were filled with footage of crowds chanting "No justice, no peace," which, according to Wikipedia, is a political slogan whose meaning is contested. That's one of the things we'll be perhaps thinking about tonight. 5 years on, we're going to be exploring with our panel this evening what those words mean and what, if anything, has changed in the church and wider society over the past 5 years. Before we begin with the panel, though, as a response to those events and in the midst of the COVID pandemic, 7 Liverpool artists channeled their voices into music, poetry, visual art and filmmaking, creating the Black with a capital B project, commissioned by 20 Stories High in Liverpool. And they came and put it on here in Storyhouse in Chester a few weeks ago. And I was able to go along and meet some of the filmmakers, one of whom was hoping to be here with us this evening, Dorcas Sabuyanga. But she isn't able to be with us, sadly, but she has said she'd be delighted if we shared her film. So we're going to begin by watching one of those films by the actor, musician and poet Dorcas Sabuyanga. This is entitled Quiet.
I feel overwhelmed. There are waves of emotions in my gut. Efforts of uprising once seized in me a time ago. Too many images of black bodies tied down, but the tides down in my gut continued churning. Each tide from different seas with different energies. The motion sickness has weighed me down. Sometimes the tides would find their way out, escaping through the crevices of my tear ducts. My silence is tied with the breathlessness of many lives taken away. I pray for justice as David did when he cried out, "Lord, hear my prayer." My mouth is silent, but my heart suffers with the burdens on this side of heaven where sin manipulates minds and systems, injecting cravings of hate into men. I don't want to be like them. I don't want the hate. I want justice. I want justice. I want you to want justice. I plead to those who hear this. I plead that those who don't understand to admit as much. It's okay not to understand. It's not okay to not try to. For the sake of your black neighbor, please try to educate yourselves. Stop and search rates between 2018 and 2019 show that black people are now nearly 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched by police than white people. This has contributed to far higher arrest rates for black people than for white people. White British people have higher than average home ownership rates, nearly double that of black Caribbean people and then treble that of black African people. These minorities are instead vastly overrepresented when it comes to private renting and social housing. White British children are 10% more likely to achieve the expected standard in reading, writing and maths. By the time the two groups reach A levels, white British students are more than 3 times as likely to achieve high grades than black Caribbean students, according to figures from the Department for Education. Systematic racism in the UK even manifests itself in the proportion of deaths from the coronavirus pandemic. Data reveals that people from quote-unquote BAME backgrounds are up to twice as likely to die from COVID-19 than people of white British ethnicity. The risk of death for people of Bangladeshi ethnicity is twice as high as white British, while other Asian, Black and Caribbean ethnicities are between 10% and 50% more likely to die, according to a report from Public Health England. Research and data from www.independent.co.uk. Quiet, written and produced by Dorcas Seb.
All of the Black with a capital B films can be found online. And if there's time, we'll share another one at the end by Paisley Reid. But what we're going to do now is invite our panel up to the stage, and I'm going to introduce each one and invite them to come up and take their seat, and then just say for a couple of minutes, just share what you think that phrase "no justice, no peace" means, what that kind of brings to your mind. So we're going to start with Canon Chine McDonald. As well as being Canon Theologian here at Chester Cathedral, Chine is a writer, broadcaster, and director of the religion and society think tank Theos. She's the author of God is Not a White Man and Other Revelations, and Unmaking Mary, Shattering the Myth of Perfect Motherhood. She's vice chair of Greenbelt Festival and a trustee for Christian Aid. So, Chine, if you'd like to come to the stage, I'll give Chine a round of applause. Yeah, you want to come in? Do you want to start at the end? We get to test the microphones as well this way.
Yes, so no justice, no peace. When I think about justice, I think about making things right, repairing wrongs of the past. When I think about racial justice and racial injustice, I think about all of the centuries of harm that has been done to Black people in white majority contexts. And when I think about no peace, I think about what peace looks like in the mind, the spirit, and the body. I think that a lack of peace, you see how it plays out negatively in the spirit, mind, and body. And for centuries, yes, terrible things have been done to Black people. Actually, it also affects Black people today. It affects our mental health. It affects our bodies and our health outcomes. It affects how we see the world. There is a quote from Theologian called Ekamini Uwan, who says, "This is the psyche of the colonized mind, always at war with itself." So for me, no peace is that sense of kind of a war, a battle going on inside, and that can manifest in the mind, but also in the body. In 2020, when watching George Floyd's murder, a lot of people kind of questioned why Black people in the UK cared so much. But for me and for lots of my Black friends, there was almost this kind of very visceral feeling, this reaction that we felt in our bodies to what we were experiencing. And some psychologists talk about vicarious trauma, that being a vicarious trauma that manifests in all sorts of different ways because of this lack of peace. We heard it a little bit in that video as well, where she says, waves of emotion in my gut. That sense of not feeling at peace in ourselves because of these external and historic things that have happened.
Thank you, Chine. So next we have Reverend Canon Dr. Ellen Loudon. From drama student to priest and Christian activist, Ellen, who's got Tig here with her today. Ellen is the Director of Social Justice for the Diocese of Liverpool and Canon Chancellor of Liverpool Cathedral. She is editor of 12 Rules for Christian Activists and chair of Together Liverpool and Micah Liverpool, among other things, I think. Ellen, it's good to have you with us. Let's give Ellen a round of applause.
So as Director of Social Justice in the Diocese of Liverpool, I have the honour of working with some extraordinary people who do extraordinary work, and we are forever seeking justice and peace in the work that we do. Micah is one of the charities, and Kathy here is from Micah Liverpool, and we focus on those Micah principles of justice, kindness, and humility. And the work that we do tries to challenge that notion that there will never be justice and never be peace. It's interesting sitting underneath the peace doves, which were indeed in Liverpool Cathedral a few years back, and remembering the calls for prayer that we had on our peace doves, and just thinking, gosh, you know, when, oh God, when, oh God, and then sitting here with this behind me and thinking, gosh, you know, it was VE Day the other day, 80 years peace, and yet here we are still waiting. Hopefully I brought my book because Anthony was very kind to mention the book. I brought it because hopefully as we speak this evening, we will talk a little bit about all the stories of peacemakers and justice makers, and the privilege of working with these 12 people who wrote stories about justice and peace in this book, and just that sense of expectation that people have as they seek justice and peace. So that's the frame in which I'm coming this evening. So thank you.
Next up, we have Nadene Wright. Nadene was appointed last year as Diocesan Racial Justice Officer, a new role for the Diocese of Chester. With her secondary school teacher background, Nadene is passionate about equality in the classroom and the importance of starting students on a level playing field. Nadene, it's great to have you with us.
So for me, the idea of no justice, no peace, there's a synergy to it. Repetition of the word no, to say no more oppression, no more of this mistreatment. We've seen the idea of no justice in terms of how there is an absence of fair treatment towards Black people and brown people globally. Police brutality rates are high. There's been no justice in terms of how police are enforcing their power on Black people within society. And there's been a lack of justice in terms of the judicial system, that we've seen police brutality, we've seen a lot of fatalities within the Black community, which have not seen any justice in terms of making sure that these people are locked away as well. So no justice has a multidimensional element to it. And because of all of these elements, the oppression that Black people have had to go through, there's no peace. There's a lack of trust within the Black community towards white people, because they know that obviously police are in a role of power, and there's that distrust and disconnection. There's also no peace internally, knowing that you have to kind of wake up and put on a facade to make sure that you're able to be free from danger, trying to dim your light as much as possible. And thankfully, with the revelation of George Floyd, obviously it was an awful event that occurred, but there has been a lot of sight in that, and a lot of people have become aware of the cloak that they were wearing, and the fact that there has been no peace within the Black community, and now we're seeing changes within that.
Brilliant, thank you, Nadene, and hopefully we'll get on to talking about some of those changes shortly. Finally, in our panel, we have Canon Dr. Ben Fulford. Ben is Deputy Head of Humanities, Culture and Environment at the University of Chester and Associate Professor of Christian Theology. He's also another Canon Theologian here at the Cathedral. He's author of God's Patience and Our Work, Hands Frei, Generous Orthodoxy and the Ethics of Hope. And together with Dr. Hannah Ewens, he co-led the Imperial Legacies Sacred Spaces project here in partnership with the Cathedral. And he was Assistant Secretary of the Society for the Study of Theology with oversight of its Theology and Race initiative. Ben, thank you for coming.
So when I was thinking about this phrase, this slogan, no justice, no peace, I was really reflecting on the deep connection that it signals between justice and peace, and what that means for our understanding of peace and of peacemaking, and of the need to link them together in this way. So one thing it makes me think is that peace is much more than the absence of physical violence and direct physical conflict. And an idea I found really helpful in understanding that myself, as someone who doesn't particularly suffer from these things, is the notion of structural conflict and structural violence. I'll just take a minute to explain that. So this is the idea that the way in which we shape our society, the way in which we order the way that we relate to one another, the way our institutions work, the way that opportunity and power and wealth are distributed, the way that access to justice and healthcare are distributed, the way that research works for the benefits of some people more than others in relation to healthcare, the kinds of things that were mentioned in the video and that we've heard our other panelists talk about. The harms that result from that are not only manifest in cases where a police officer murders somebody, they're also manifest in many other ways, which aren't quite as perhaps as visible, aren't perhaps so directly physical in the way that they happen, although they may be physical in some of in these sort of the trauma and the effects that are ongoing. So it's that idea that conflict doesn't only happen through physical violence, and hence peace is more than the absence of that kind of conflict. No justice, no peace. That means, secondly, that addressing conflict and seeking peace is about more than addressing only those manifestations of physical violence. It's about addressing those underlying ways in which society is shaped and shapes us, and what happens to us, and the inequalities in that. So that means you can't have a cheap reconciliation, a cheap peace. It will be costly, it'll involve significant change to societies, to institutions, to churches. And then thirdly, the need to say no justice, no peace, the need to shout it, and the need for people like me to hear it, because those ways of which society is shaped and the effects it has, if you're not particularly discomforted by them, they can be quite invisible to you. Society can be shaped for your benefit in such a way that you don't see how it works. And hence, for me, the power and the necessity of to say, to shout, to protest, no justice, no peace.
Thanks, Ben. So what we're going to do now, you've heard some opening statements from each of our panelists, and there's already plenty, I think, to think about and reflect on in what we've heard. We're going to give you a bit of time, 10 minutes, just to chat with the people around you about your response to what you've already heard, and we've got some pieces of paper and pens. If as you're talking it generates a question that you would like to ask, there's an opportunity to give that to Monica, and Monica will then pass those to me in 10 minutes time. But if you feel the need to refill your drinks as well, there's an opportunity to do that. So 10 minutes to have a bit of a chat, reflect on what you've already heard, and generate some questions, and then we'll recommence with some discussion.
We just
yeah.
And were they,
I've got those questions.
Yeah. See what comes through.
So will we get ones from them and then ones on the sheet?
I don't think the gentleman on the back thinks the dog wants to see it. The man with the blue shirt. What? Man with the blue shirt.
Yeah.
Tig wants to be friends with him, and I don't think he should. Very expressive face.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't notice. Was it making a noise? Thank you though for.
Tigger's got a very expressive face.
I know, it's hilarious, isn't it? He's always asking questions as well.
How do you know people quite well?
Pardon?
Do you know the people quite well?
Here? No.
Oh, I thought you said he's always asking questions.
Oh, no, the dog. Yeah, Anthony's always asking questions. He never stops. I said the dog's always asking questions. Dean said, "Do you know Anthony quite well?" I was just like, "No, but you are asking questions." It's interesting about how contested the no justice, no peace thing is, isn't it?
It's like, what is contested?
Well, because I suppose it's the no to, as Nadene says, it's the no.
Yeah.
It's also the no, I don't want it.
Yeah.
So it's and then also I guess it's always with those with slogans. It's like who does it belong to? And it belongs to the person who's saying it at that moment, isn't it? It's not, it's There was a fantastic. Did you get over there to the Walker? Did you get to the Walker to the exhibition?
I met your is it your racial doctor?
Yeah, Jenny.
Did I meet her on Saturday? Yeah.
Jenny Taylor, yeah, the women's, yes,
the
yeah.
yeah.
Because she was really excited about coming down. God, she's a force to reckon with, isn't she?
Yeah,
She's
great.
absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
Have you met her?
No,
Have you
never
met Jenny?
no.
She was going to come over this evening, but she couldn't. But she's absolutely fantastic. You really need to get together.
I've messaged her but not spoken to her or anything.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to sort out a cup of tea.
Yeah.
She's working on the Slavery Truth project at the moment in a couple of spaces, so in the cathedral and at St James in the city, which has got the largest amount of monuments to enslavers. The whole edifice was built on the back of black people. It's just horrific. But they're trying to tell their story, and that's not. It's not without a cost for them.
Yeah.
But they've got to pay it. They've got to do it.
She's got the event, doesn't she, in June?
Yes. What
I'm
else?
going
So
to that, yeah.
what's she doing? So she's doing. Is that when Rosemary Mount when?
It's the truth telling.
Yes, the truth telling. Yeah, we still don't really quite know what that's about. So the Racial Justice Unit have set it up, and there's lots of things. Have you heard about this conference, the truth telling conference?
I'm surprised.
Yeah.
So, is it Shannon?
Sharon
Prentice. I said Sharon Prentice. She's set it up, and it's with the university, and then there's some things happening at the cathedral as well. But it's one of those classic slight disconnects where everybody assumes everybody knows what's going on, but actually we're not entirely clear.
But it's It's a racial justice unit event.
It's a racial justice unit event
Are you going?
with the university. Sorry?
There's no program yet on website.
No, exactly. That's what I mean. It's just a little bit chaotic. But I think it's because, as I say, it's the university and the racial justice unit, and at the moment they haven't quite connected. So once it does, I'm sure the programme will go up. I know they're having a posh dinner at the cathedral in one of the evenings, and I think they've got a good number of delegates coming, because I think they're staying at Hope University, I think. But who knows? It's good.
You get to go.
Yeah, I'm going on day 2 because it's a 3-day event. Yeah. Should be good. I guess it's in collaboration with what you're doing in a way, because I know it's got
Interesting take on the same thing.
Yeah, related.
Yeah.
Ben, your take on a similar theme to Chine's, but as a white man holding that is interesting, isn't it? Like how we get told.
Yeah.
What was the project you did with Hannah?
Hannah, yeah. So it was beginning to explore the connections between the cathedral and the history of empire, slavery, and colonialism, really. So we looked at a former bishop of Chester called Bilby Porteous, who's
Great name.
great name. He's a legacy of a slave-owning family. He was an advocate of the abolition of the trade and of the gradual improvement of the condition of enslaved people. It's quite an ambiguous kind
A gradual improvement.
gradualist, exactly. Him alongside Akuso Bunyaso, who was probably buried somewhere near here, a formerly enslaved black person who wrote his autobiography and died in Chester.
Do you know where he's buried? You don't know.
Well, it's St Oswald's Church, which used to meet in this space
Right. Okay.
in that period. And then the other case study was the Cheshire Regiment and Charles Napier, who was their general, and the Sind province, the conquest of Sind province in 1842-43. So these two connections with the cathedrals, and we hope to sort of expand the scope of that in future.
Has that been published?
Well, the exhibition's online, so if you go to the
Right.
cathedral website, you can see it there. Yeah. So it's a pilot, really.
Just a couple more minutes, folks, before we reconvene. So if you've got questions, make sure you get them down and wave them in the air so Monica can collect them. If you do want another drink, grab one now.
Got my sippy cup. The weirdest thing happened to me today. I discovered that I'd had a stroke in the last 3 or 4 years, and I didn't even know. Because I was stumbling, and my mobility was getting weirder. I went to the doctor, gone through like loads and loads of tests.
Yes,
When it got to the MRI, it's like, oh yeah, a bit of your brain.
I'm now collaborating
had a
with
stroke.
schools and anti-racism programs. So yeah.
Okay, so they immediately put me on blood thinners. Gone through I could also
about to launch a video as well.
Which is fine. I think
School as well. So yeah. Yeah.
It's just gone.
Lots of admin.
Yeah.
But they don't.
And it's going on to market season.
They can't tell when.
When it was, I don't have backlash.
When was the exam?
I have had
Last week.
like
Don't they have
TIA,
So all their final
like
deadlines.
little blackouts, but not anything that
Essays.
one day I woke up and couldn't walk. It wasn't. It's like it feels like it's been a slow, steady
good.
process of
No, it is,
debilitation.
particularly when you see students have really come on and grown, and
Yeah.
that's really
Do you actually get
So-
to know your students then?
quite
don't-
well.
I'm
We
still
don't have huge
processing
numbers,
it.
so
I found out
we know them all.
less than 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I'm not sure my lecturers will be able to
And so
tell.
blood
I think
thinners are
that's
to
so weird,
prevent
because there's so many
Yeah, so I will.
I guess when it's a
The
small
likelihood
cohort.
I'm less likely to have a stroke.
What did you study?
Because I'm on blood thinners.
French and English. Yeah. So.
And they
Going
don't
to
seem
change
to
rule after the. Are you
seem to have created
Have you
any
before?
side
Lots of
effects.
times. One of the
In
department.
fact, if anything,
Oh, is it?
the whole uses set me into
thought
a
it was like a
process of
separate
what I'd quite like to live.
Yeah, it is.
Whereas I
I
think
won't
I
give
was
you
like
still all
something
just
different
go
to
every time.
life and death.
Yeah.
Means his mum died. It's not
No,
I
it's
wanted
French
to
as well,
die,
it's
you know
like-
what I mean?
Yeah, it's French cuisine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you like French food? Yeah.
Wanting to live is good, I guess.
Yes.
You've got your long drive back to Audlam, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Nantwich.
It's
Yes.
strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
Life is very
I guess you're used to it anyway. You do this every single evening.
still can't.
It's not too
Sometimes just can't digest it.
Yeah.
the radio.
It's like any sense.
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's when I say my prayers, you know,
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
So
know.
you said your daughter was at university?
Like lots of people
and
good at
no,
maths.
I've got two sons.
Oh, no, it was Anthony was at the
Yes, that's right. He's been at
Yeah.
Cambridge, I think.
Do that, wasn't it?
It's a
So my eldest is going to go to university.
valuable and worthy distraction. Then.
Oh, wow.
It's not, it's not
Which one
hard
is it?
to do that.
Gloucester.
It's just
Nice. Is that where she wanted to go?
it's a bit of a random
he-
one. I'm
he's-
going to
yeah.
ask you. So my husband's called Mark too.
University's
But so at Theos we do a lot of thinking
So he does music
Greek tech,
and things like that?
theology and AI stuff. And
Is he in the church as well?
Mark died.
not really.
Another Mark who would speak like him,
I tried to
his
coax
memories,
him
who had a body.
Yeah.
I'd be like, yes, I would.
we can do
Yeah.
that.
I mean, yeah,
You think
his
we
mum
would?
is a
But then
Dad,
when I
yeah,
was
obviously.
like, why would you? But I was like, but I
at this moment,
Would,
that's not.
do.
Okay, folks, if I can ask you to draw your conversations to a close, and if you have got any questions that you've written down, if you wave them in the air, and Monica will come round and collect them. But while she does that, I'm going to ask our panel first question.
Pivot.
We've been, as I said, it was the 25th of May, 5 years ago, the day that George Floyd was murdered. And I know one or two of you did pick up on this, on kind of, that the impact of that day and what you remember about those events already in your opening statements. But that's my first question, really, particularly those of you who perhaps didn't say how it impacted you at the time. What are your memories of those events 5 years ago? Who'd like to go first?
I can kick off because I was writing my book, God is Not a White Man, from February 2020 to September 2020. And that was, the deadline was set long before COVID, long before George Floyd. And I'm really glad I was writing and processing through that time. And I'm really glad I hadn't finished the book in February because so much of it was my response to what was happening. And I remember when he was killed, I think it was a few days before I could bring myself to watch his murder, because I was kind of bracing myself and I just didn't want to. But I was seeing the reactions. So I watched it, and I've only ever watched it once, because I found it so shocking. And I remember kind of shaking watching it and just being distraught. And as I kind of talked to other people about it, a lot of Black people, this kind of idea of vicarious trauma, it's like they saw their own necks on the line. It was like, that is me, or that is my father, or my cousin, or but yet there was something in it that also was not surprising to me. It was kind of like, it just felt very familiar, and a familiar happening, violence against Black bodies, violence against Black men. And as we know, George Floyd is not the only person who's been killed by a police officer or by racist violence. There had been people in the weeks before and the weeks afterwards. So yes, I remember. That's what I remember.
Anyone else?
I had a similar experience in terms of a book, in that this book was just about to be published and launched around that time. And I'd asked a Black friend of mine to review the book and maybe put something on the cover, because that's what you do when you write a book. You get somebody to write nice things about your book. And this person very kindly read the book and then came back to me and quite forcefully said, Ellen, I will not review your book because there isn't a clear Black voice in it. And I was devastated. I was devastated at every level. On a personal level, my friend wouldn't review my book, and that I hadn't heard and seen that before the book had been written. I'd included a chapter from a group of people in South Africa that I'd worked for with Christian Aid, with the Church Land Trust, and there were Black voices included in that, but my friend was very clear that they were part of an NGO and that that wasn't the voice that was needed at that moment. And I heard that and asked the publisher to withdraw the book, and they wouldn't. And so I've had to face that reality, and absolutely would not have this book would not be this book if I'd written it, if it had been a year later. And the blindness, and you know, I like to think of myself as relatively woke, but the unconscious bias that was in me at that time was devastating. But it was right. And it was right that I was challenged by my friend. It was right that the book went out, and it's right that I get to speak about that, because that moment where, you know, white people were getting on their knees, I was also really embarrassed and really uncomfortable about people taking the knee, and absolutely horrified that yet another Black person had died in a country where you hope that the impact of history would have enabled that not to happen, just as a logical frame.
Thank you. Nadene.
Yeah, I would say it was an incredibly pivotal moment for us as well. At the time, we lived in Manchester, and it was just everywhere. There were photos within people's windows in their houses. Also, Brianna, just before then, she had died, and various other people had died. And it felt very realistic, as she just mentioned, with living vicariously through that experience. It was just so pivotal, and it was a massive turning point. And also, I was pregnant at the time, and it felt really strange having my husband with me. My husband's actually, he's Hungarian, Jewish Hungarian, and we'd walk into Asda, for example, in Hume, and we'd get stares. You know, people were suddenly looking at us as if we needed to be divided, as if we had to be separated because of the fact that there was such controversy between the races. And it was just really bizarre to see how life had changed so much. But on the other hand, I noted that people finally had a voice and people had a platform to express themselves. I was seeing all kinds of celebrities openly talk about the racism that they had endured and their personal experiences. And I really resonated with those. The fact that a lot of the time Black people speak up in certain situations and get ignored. I thought that was just a me problem. And then suddenly I'm seeing others say the same thing, that, oh yeah, you know, sometimes I'm in a meeting and I'm saying my ideas and suddenly it'll be ignored. And then another person will suggest the exact same thing, who's white, and everyone will say, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And I had experienced that myself, and it really impacted on my self-esteem in the past. Suddenly seeing others talk about it happening to them, it was suddenly like, wow, this isn't actually a me thing. I don't have low self-esteem. It's just others around me make me feel a certain way. So in that case, it did actually increase my confidence, and it made me think, wow, okay, there's an actual thing going on here. This is institutional, it's systemic, it's something that needs to be eradicated. It's kind of embedded within the mindsets of people, and it's not a me problem. So in that sense, it was massively eye-opening as well.
Ben, did you want to say anything about what you remember of that time?
Yeah, just briefly. I don't remember the day itself particularly. I think my reaction to it was really not again. Sort of having been made aware, conscientized to the epidemic of anti-Black violence in the US and in the UK, and there'd been, you know, several years before, Eric Garner in quite similar circumstances, Breonna Taylor just months before, but I could still be surprised somehow by it happening again, which says something about how detached I am from the realities of that. The other thing which I think took me by surprise yeah, was the reaction, and people speaking out and protesting, particularly the moment in Bristol when the statue of Edward Colston was dragged off its plinth and dumped in the harbour, and that seemed like something that I hadn't seen the like of in my life in the UK, and that seemed really significant as a moment of taking that radical action after years of delay and frustration, and what might be possible in light of it.
Sorry about that. So we've had a question from the audience. How do you think the world's most powerful leaders being white men affects justice and peace in Britain today?
Badly.
Okay, I'll go. So it's these particular white men. It's not white men in general. It is these particular white men who are leading, who have the most powerful jobs in the world and have been voted for, given these platforms, that are the problem. So my book is called God Is Not a White Man, and I think people assume that I don't like white men, but I am married to one. Like, it's not, I don't actually not like white men. It is these particular ones. And I feel like, well, Trump, again, and I guess the leaders of the global populist movements play on this kind of polarization. We talked about this a little bit this afternoon. And I feel like because of these particular white men, we've gone backwards. We've gone way backwards to the point where it feels I'm feeling disillusioned about even talking about these issues anymore, because it feels like so in 2020 2021 it felt like right now this is the time we're going to move forward. This is a real change is happening. I was seeing white church leaders, surprising white church leaders at the front of kind of Black Lives Matter marches. It felt like it was making a difference. But now, you know, councillors being voted in, leaders being voted in who talk about woke issues. DEI has become like a bad term. People are going to get rid of all the DEI officers. This is what Nigel Farage is saying. And it's gone so backwards. And I think it is a reaction to where we were 5 years ago. For some people, watching what was happening, they did not like it. It wasn't everyone that was kind of joining in this kind of no justice, no peace, let's all fight for racial justice. Some people were triggered by that. So it's these particular white men.
Thank you. Any other comments on that, on the leaders today?
I've just come back from a Dean of Women's Ministry conference with a lot of women a lot of white women, to be fair, who are leading women within the Church of England. And I think that one of our observations was around the patriarchy, and one of the challenges that it's the patriarchy not being good for any of us, men or women, but particularly around the populist interpretation of the patriarchy that is emerging as potentially as a reaction, but it's just been latent, it's just been hanging about, and it's uncomfortable, beyond being uncomfortable. It is really dangerous, I think. And I think that I think if we don't resist it at lots of different levels, then we will become subject to the danger, all of us, I think.
Thank you. We've talked a bit about the societal changes and some of the things that you've mentioned there. Within the church, I wonder, Nadene, particularly in your role, how do you feel that things have changed? What changes, positive or negative, have there been over the last 5 years?
Well, there were definitely findings that there was institutional racism within the Church of England, and the light was shed on that. And obviously, the Four Laments Action Plan was made because of that. So Four Laments Action, for those who don't know, is a document which details what every department within the diocese needs to do, and kind of actionable tasks to work towards, and to implement and show progress towards racial justice. And the document is it's thick, it's dense, it's got a lot in there. I would say that we are definitely working towards achieving the goals within the document, within the Four Laments Action Plan. The Church of England has quite boldly said that they, are unified in wanting to see positive change towards racial justice. However, we have seen that there are still disparities, especially in terms of recruitment. Some stats are out there that suggest there are, 15% of applicants were Black applying for clergy roles, and only 3% were appointed. So there's definitely institutional racism. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. But I would say that that the Church of England is definitely making positive changes. And I've also only been in the role since September. I've had a lot of churches reach out to me to do various talks on unconscious bias, on anti-racism, on how to connect with other communities. So there is that awareness. Congregations do want to connect and are definitely understanding that there's a lot more to be done within communities as well. So I would definitely say we're moving towards positive shifts, but that it is gradual, and it is obviously it's a slow process.
Nadene, I'm so
That's fine.
sorry
It's
about
fine.
the dog.
Tig's coming to join us. That's absolutely fine. He'll be a lot happier here with his mum.
I've been away for 2 days. It's the most pathetic display
Tig, that way.
I've ever heard.
Mum's over there. Look.
Yeah, right. Sit down.
Brilliant.
Sit down.
Ben, how about you? Any comments on that and the changes in the past 5 years within what you have seen?
Yeah, I mean, there's some very visible changes in terms of the number of minority ethnic bishops, people in the House of Bishops and the college especially. That's been good to see. There's been, in the areas, one of these areas that I'm really interested in terms of public memory, there's been some fantastic work done at places like Bristol Cathedral, the All God's Children exhibition, also St Paul's and Lancaster Priory, places like that. Attempts to try and take seriously the legacies of colonialism and slavery in the very fabric of our buildings, in the ways in which they make or don't make people sort of feel welcome. That sort of work, there's clearly an awful lot has happened in terms of national institutions and trying to put in place the infrastructure, the systems, the structures that will promote the kind of work that Nadine's doing, for example. But as you say, a long way to go, and it's slow, isn't it?
Thank you. So I'm struck. One of the things that Paisley Reed, one of the artists who was involved in the Black with a capital B project, said in terms of what's changed over the last 5 years was that there's this cycle of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and struck by what you were saying, Chine, about the reaction really in more recent times to what happened after 2020. What do you see as being the barriers now to making further progress, particularly in light of all these structural changes that Ben's described that have happened? What are the barriers now that prevent us from getting further forward?
I think that every time we see these things as programs, so racial justice, it's a program, or child poverty, we'll have a program about child poverty. Every time we have initiatives that don't actually seek real cultural change, that we will always revert back. And statistically, as far as I understand, so having done a little bit of work around diversity, equity and inclusion, is that if an institution has a program to improve its diversity, equity and inclusion, you'll see change for about 5 years. And then if it doesn't make a culture change within those 5 years, it reverts back, but reverts back in a very negative way. So in a and statistically, what happens is even less diversity occurs if it hasn't within 10 years. So if we don't actually see this as real social justice, real change, real cultural shift, there is a statistical inevitability that it will revert back in a negative way. And that's the thing that concerns me, that this is, we were so shocked that we did something, but it didn't embed.
I would add that I think there are political barriers and there are kind of internal barriers. So I think we have very quickly ended up in a climate where, even for my own organisation, when I'm thinking about funding, I think, do we want to do the really provocative, so-called woke research and risk not getting funding, or do we go for the safe thing? And I think that with my, the organisations that I'm part of, like Greenbelt or Christian Aid, do we need to dial down that kind of the justice stuff in order to survive? Because everyone's scared. Everyone's scared of this kind of the narrative and what's in the air. Everyone is trying to survive. So I think that's a political barrier. I also think there is a personal barrier, which is what Ellen was getting at with the kind of programs. The fact that the Church of England, yes, did a report a few years ago. The Church of England has done something like, I think it's 33 reports on race in my lifetime. It's another report. Yes, it's got some tangible action to it, but there is something underlying that still hasn't changed. And I think Emma Dabbery, in her book called What White People Can Do Next, basically says the reason why we keep going round and round in this circle is because we haven't actually sold a compelling enough narrative about why racial justice is good for all of us. So I think we kind of revert to the white people need to give up power to these people. We need to have more positions, which means fewer white people, which means more brown people in these roles. But actually, she basically says, actually, it's better for all of us if black people aren't killed in the street. It's better for all of us if everyone can have a seat at the table. It's better for all of us if there is equal access to justice. Like, it's not just this demand for white people to give up power, because that is never going to sell. We're just going to keep coming back to the same issue.
Yeah, I think that's key. That is really important.
Then Nadine, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would just say I feel as if the barriers are kind of ingrained within the systems that are already in place. So there's educational barriers, plenty of stats, and also supported in the video by Dorcas, that, black and brown children in classrooms are put in exclusions or, sent home more frequently than their white peers. There's obviously judicial barriers in terms of policing black and brown people. So I think the barriers that are in place need to be tackled first. They're ingrained within the systems. And once we've tackled those structures and we've really changed the culture and people genuinely back it, that's when we'll see actual change. Because at the moment, we've still got a lot of biases in place. And in terms of recruitment, for example, there's a black candidate could apply for a job, and it's actually been done before, many experiments on it, where a black candidate has their actual name, which is foreign sounding, and then they'll apply again with an English sounding name, and they'll get, through the next round towards interview. And people are aware of this problem, that, there's affirmation biases, affinity biases. People want to employ people who are like them and who will fit in. So we need to break those kind of unconscious biases, make people aware of it. Education is really key.
I think that's also reflected in the church and in its recruitment challenges, and the way that it discerns vocations and the way that it trains people in the culture of training institutions, and how relationships work with training incumbents, initial ministerial trade education. sense in which this is a recent report came out last year called Behind the Stained Glass, which reinforces stories which have been reported in reports over many years from the Committee for Minority Ethnic and Concerns and others, and various individual sort of biographical narratives of the expectations about conforming to a certain kind of classed Englishness, certain kind of performance of English identity, and also expectations of people from ethnic minorities of conforming to certain stereotypes, and all that being profoundly harmful to people going through those processes, all of which makes the cultural change so much harder. You know, what's going to make the difference to how spaces feel and function in churches, how people feel in them, and the kinds of transformations that happen beyond programs, that happen because of stuff that's not been planned, that happen sort of spontaneously because of the way that people interact and relate and buy in and contribute and start to change the agenda, the questions, the concerns, the culture. Yeah, I've seen places where that's sort of begun to happen, and it's stuff which you don't anticipate, which makes the biggest difference, I think. But the conditions for that are the really hard thing.
Is it? I also wonder if there is, and it maybe is a question for everybody, if there is that we have a sense that just somebody else having justice means that somebody else has to not have some in some way, and we try and talk about justice as being not like pie. So if I get some justice, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have it. And that actually justice is about there being more pie for everybody, and that somehow the way that we talk about justice and the way that we even we earnestly pursue it gives the impression that somebody else, it has to be taken from somebody else in order for me to have it. And I wonder if that is part of the contested nature of that, even that no justice, no peace. It's like, so how we reframe justice, how we reframe peace as a positive. Yeah, positive isn't even, that's not quite a good enough word. But you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that picks up on what Chine was saying about finding a compelling narrative.
Yeah.
For everybody, and that's something I'd like to come back to in a moment. I just want to again remind the audience, if you do have a question, you want to jot it down, wave it in the air, and Monica will come and pick it up. But on that question of the compelling narrative, you know, I'm really struck. One of the things I've said about these, you know, 8,000 paper doves hanging above our heads, each one has a message on from somebody. Those 8,000 or so people are all very different. Many of them will not have agreed with each other on all sorts of things. We've got many in different languages from people all over the world. And yet, here they are together expressing a common longing for peace. And that's the impact of the installation. I wonder what you think the church might do or might offer into that space where there is a need for a compelling narrative for everyone.
There's a play by Bertolt Brecht called Mother Courage. I don't know if you've heard that, but in the middle of the play, there's 5 minutes of peace, and what happens is that it appears that peace is of no use to anybody. That the war has to start again because the economy is driven towards it. Churches are driven towards it. We commemorate, we strive for peace. People lose the point of the oomph for peace in the 5 minutes of peace. So war starts all over again because it actually appears to be good for people. And Brecht had a particular take on this, obviously, but I do wonder again how we change that narrative that peace is better for everybody, when actually the reality is most of our structures mitigate towards war and strife and discomfort, and maybe that's somehow doing some research on that, the church commissioning research on the real cost of peace.
I think that in order for the church to be able to put a compelling narrative out there, I think the piece also starts with us. And I think that I'm not sure the wider public, if they're looking at the church from the outside, think there's peace there, let me have a bit of that. I mean, yes, there are obviously pockets of that. When you walk into a cathedral or a quiet church, there is that sense of quiet and peace and stillness, but I don't think most people think the church itself is a peaceful place. So it starts with us. It starts with us. Again, we talked about this a little bit this afternoon, but having or showing these prophetic acts of solidarity and peace, and visually being able to demonstrate how we are people of peace rather than people of conflict and war and arguments and polarization. So there's a lot of work that we need to do first before speaking into the wider public.
I'm struck as well in some of the examples we've had, whether it's the films, the play that you talked about, the art here. There is something about potentially for the arts, and obviously, Chine, you're very involved with Greenbelt, which has historically had that kind of idea of art being a prophetic way of speaking and offering a different narrative into the public square. Does that resonate for you? Have you seen good examples that particularly around these ideas of around racial justice?
Yeah, so both of my recent books have explored what art tells us about our society and who we value. So it describes kind of God and the ways in which God and Jesus have been depicted throughout European art for many centuries. Obviously suggest that whiteness and maleness are superior in some way. And again, Unmaking Mary talks about how Mary has been represented as this kind of perfect ideal of motherhood, which is white, young, and beautiful. I think there are ways in which there are lots of examples. So, for example, Our Lady of Ferguson, which is by Mark Dukes, who's a kind of 21st century iconographer, in which Mary is depicted as a black mother with a Christ child who's got their arms kind of up, kind of the "don't shoot" sign, and that is a really prophetic act about who God is, who Jesus is, the solidarity with those who experience actual violence and racist violence. And I think for many people that can kind of reconfigure how they see society, but also how they see God. I think absolutely art is a way to tell a different story.
Give a couple of examples. I think part of the value of art also can be to remind us, to surface the conflicts. I think facing the conflicts is part of the challenge of having a credible narrative on peace. So two examples of that. One from St. Paul's Cathedral, they had a project involving various artistic interventions in relation to memorials of figures involving the British Empire and its history, like some of the ones on the wall behind us. So one, for example, put alongside, I think, a Governor General of Nigeria, an image of a king of Benin, if I remember correctly. Just that interruption of the display of the memorialization of powerful white men of a certain class and of what was hidden by their memorialization, I think was a really powerful intervention there. There were many others of different kinds. Another one which works in another way to surface what's been made less visible, more obscure, and what's involved in that is one of the projects of the artist Barbara Walker, whose work is really well worth exploring. And one of those involves taking very well-known pieces of art by European masters, so-called, some of which depict biblical scenes, and in which black figures are various, often in the margins of the image, often in subordinate or servile positions. And she highlights them. They end up being the only people who are painted in colour, and everyone else just comes out in this white embossing and are pushed into the background. And it helps you understand something about the power dynamics of the images and how they work, and of the societies that they were created for. And in the case of the biblical narratives, of the ways in which we've come to understand and imagine them, and imagine ourselves in relation to them. So that's another example.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, when I was talking about culture change, art is one of the things that changes culture, and the more that we invest in that creative space of changing culture, the more space there is to debate in a grown-up and interesting and often embracing the conflict of different opinions and ideas.
Can I just add that also, yeah, I do think arts in general have such an open platform to be able to express themselves. So, for example, it doesn't just have to be the physical art on a piece of paper. It can be, through poetry. It can be through music. There's a very influential rapper who's done a lot of music based on the crisis in terms of racial justice, and he's had a massive impact in communities. And also there is an increase in people going into churches because they are looking for peace. So young people are actually going into churches, not really the Church of England, but they are going into churches generally. And they've said that it is mostly Pentecostal churches that people are going into. And it is because they're kind of a bit more open. You do find that peace within churches where they're a bit more expressive, and also where they're talking a bit more closely about Christ. So people find that there's a peace when there's a relation towards Christ, and also the people within the church are actually demonstrating those Christ-like features. So I would definitely say that art is a very strong form of expression, and that it is definitely influencing people to come into church.
Thank you, Nadene. A question from the audience. I'm going to try and combine the two questions together as we're getting towards the end. But this is about the church's role politically and in politics. So it's partly picking up on, I think, Ellen's point earlier. Is it possible that the populist movement is touching on an experience of diminishing resources within a societal safety net? And what role, if any, does the church have, do you think, in political activism to build robust economic opportunity and promoting racial justice? So the political activism in the church.
I think yes. So I think that the church does play a big role in kind of activism. You look at churches up and down the country who are active in their communities, who are speaking about human rights, who are speaking about poverty alleviation, running food banks, all of these things. And I think also the Church of England in particular is embedded within our political system. Bishops in the House of Lords have a voice and a platform into which to speak into politics. Now, sometimes when they do that, some people don't like it and suggest that the church and politics should be separate. But the church is engaged in the world, so it has to be engaged in politics.
We're celebrating, it's 40 years of Faith in the City this year, and we're doing some work in Liverpool around what has changed and what hasn't changed, and then some work around urbanity and the role of the church in public life, in civic life. I think that we've lost ground in terms of taking up civic roles. I think that, I don't know how many people are on licensing committees anymore that are committed Christians who were able to speak into why we have to have so many betting shops on the high street, why we have to have so many licenses that extend drinking and allow street homelessness, etc., that these things are that Christians in speaking in and activating and being activists in that space don't have to be people with placards. There are very, very great, really, really interesting ways to make social change and be part of civic life. I think as Christians, we've kind of lost our courage to do that.
Thank you. Brilliant, good question. We've got to withdraw. It's all right. We're going to have to just kind of begin to draw things to an end. So apologies if I haven't got to your question. I'm going to invite Dean Tim to come and respond. While he does that, if I could just ask the four of you to just think about one thing at the minute that's giving you hope, and I'll come and ask you for that when Dean Tim has said a few words.
Thank you, Anthony. And I'm not going to go on for too long because I'd like to see the Paisley Reed film as well. But thank you very much, Chine and Ellen and Nadine and Ben and Anthony. Could we just give them a round of applause, please? You'll probably do that again before you leave. Just a couple of short responses from me. Many of you are from Chester. We live in a relatively comfortable city. It's a quiet, not often controversial city. We have pockets of diversity in the city, but when you walk around the streets, many of us are the same colour and we're dressed in similar clothes. And that can give a degree of disengagement with issues that really matter. I don't know how comfortable or uncomfortable many of you were looking at that great memorial behind those of you who are speaking, celebrating victory of British soldiers in Miami and with the death of many, many Black South African people are the story behind that memorial and some of the others that are here. I was struck in the light of that by a quote in Dorcas Sebb's film. I don't know whether I've quite got it right, but I've got the sentiment right. It's okay not to understand, but it's not okay to not try to understand. And one of the dangers for us in this city is not trying to understand. And so in trying to understand, just picking up some of the things that you said, Chine talking about seeing once some video of the George Floyd murder and it felt to you like vicarious trauma. For me, I have to try to understand that, and it's not as natural and as easy as it would be for you. Nadine, you said, I thought that was just a me problem until I realized others experienced the same. And again, I have to try to understand that. And this feeling that we live in dangerous times, being led by a group of very particular white men, will feel more dangerous to some of you than others of us. Although I say it's not just white men, I thought of Georgia Maloney as well. She's amongst those white men. And lastly, just to pick up, what is it that we can do to tell that narrative of why racial justice is good for us all? Is something we need to try to do and try to understand. A few little lessons from listening to the four of you and Anthony's questions this evening. So again, thank you very much. At which point I'm going to shut up, hand the microphone back to you, and we're going to see this last film.
That's right. Just very quickly, one thing that's giving you hope, and then if you'd like to come and sit down here so that you can watch the film as well. Ben.
I think I'm quite careful as a well-off white man talking about hope in the context of what we've been talking about. It's quite easy to be glibly optimistic, and I don't think there's much space for that. One thing that gives me hope, and a sense that the future is not fixed or inevitable, that the reaction, the backlash are not necessarily going to be the last word, is the example and testimony of people who've had these struggles before and who've persisted with them and often made change at great cost. It's that kind of testimony that gives me hope.
Say that hope, what gives me hope is, well, many things, but if I have to just choose one, it's the fact that I'm getting contacted by so many different schools and they want to see change occurring in their schools. They're asking me to implement anti-racism programs so that their children...
Okay. See you soon.
So that their children can become ambassadors too. So I see the change happening in our children. We're getting young global citizens, and that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
The thing that gives me a lot of hope is the work that churches, I'm in Liverpool Diocese, but the work of the churches on the front line, on the rock face, and the changes that we're seeing through our network of kindness, which is the way that we're trying to articulate the work in our diocese, and seeing that people in the face of massive injustice are carrying on. They're picking up, bashing those swords into plowshares daily, and that gives me a great deal of hope.
And I'd say for me it is the quiet revival happening out there, and also a quiet revival for me this week. So the quiet revival, if people haven't heard about it, it's Bible Society research that was out a few weeks ago that shows that there has been an increase in church going among all generations, but including in particular younger generations. And for me, as someone who kind of speaks in churches often, this is one of those weeks where I've kind of speaking to women in London, women at a church conference in London on Saturday, Norwich Cathedral Sunday, Methodists online, London Deanery yesterday, and here today. These speaking engagements are sometimes like just diary things. You have to go. At each point this week, I have been blown away, stirred up, inspired, encouraged, moved to tears about the church in its different representations, like older people serving faithfully, young people serving God vibrantly, here in this beautiful place. So yeah, I've had my own quiet revival this week as well. That's giving me hope.
Thank you very much. Let's give them all a round of applause.
Sorry.
And while Ellen and Tig and Chine come off the stage, it just remains for me to say a big thank you for coming and joining us this evening. I'm going to end by playing Paisley Reed's film. So I'll say now, thank you for coming. Our next Assemble event is in Refugee Week on the 19th of June. But before then, do come along and join us for Imtiaz Darka and the Poetry for Peace evening next Tuesday, and on the 27th, when we'll be joined by three brilliant classical Indian musicians who will be playing here under the peace doves, who are just amazing. They've played in the church where I was before I came here for us, and I'm really delighted and really excited that they're coming to play here as well under the peace doves in this magnificent setting. So do look out for those things, and look forward to seeing you again next time. But now to finish, Paisley Reed's Black with a capital B.
And more than matters, but more than magic, more than movement. Black culture, you love it, yeah, you love to use it. More than more than more than movement. More than and more than matters, but more than magic, more than movements. Shouldn't take time and demonstrations just to prove it. Black culture, you love it, yeah, you love to use it. Imitation ain't flattery, though, let's not confuse it. Culture appropriation, microaggressions, discrimination, everyday ignorance I'm used to facing. Same old excuses and I'm losing patience. But still we rise above every limitation that they place on us. Try as they might, there's no replacing us. Shine too bright to be covered up. 'Cause I'm black with a capital B, black with a capital B. 'Cause I'm black with a capital B, black with a capital B, yeah. With a capital B, with a capital We have the passion, we have the talent, we have the music. Doctors, lawyers, and scientists, teachers, yeah, we do this. Multifaceted blackness, no way to view it. Beautiful in every dark and light shade that we bloom in. Dark and light shade that we bloom in. Standing on shoulders of giants, lighting up the room, yeah. And you know it's true, that excellence is coming through. Feel that joy when you hear this tune. Maybe it was making love just for you. With a capital B, with a capital B. 'Cause I'm with a capital B, with a capital B, yeah. Bloomin', bloom, dark and light shade that we bloomin', bloomin', bloom, dark and light shade that we bloomin', bloomin', bloom, dark and light shade that we bloomin'. Black with a capital B, black with a capital B, yeah.